The first officers who entered the residence believed they were witnessing the aftermath of a tragic accident. A woman lay at the bottom of a staircase in a quiet suburban home. Blood was visible on the walls, the floor, and along the steps. At first glance, the scene appeared chaotic but explainable. Investigators initially interpreted it as a sudden and fatal fall. However, when the autopsy report was completed, it presented a conflicting account. The injuries documented during the post-mortem examination did not fully align with what investigators believed they were seeing at the scene. Certain indicators commonly associated with a fatal fall were absent, while other findings raised questions that were not immediately addressed. At the center of the case was a contradiction that proved difficult to reconcile. If the scene accurately reflected the cause of death, the autopsy should have supported it. Instead, it complicated it. This contradiction would become central to one of the most closely scrutinized criminal cases in modern American history. The case of Kathleen Peterson was shaped by early assumptions, forensic disagreement, and an investigative path that may have narrowed too quickly. On the night of December 9th, 2001, Michael Peterson contacted emergency services from his home in Durham, North Carolina. He reported that his wife, Kathleen Peterson, had fallen down a staircase and was severely injured. He emphasized the amount of blood and stated that she was still breathing at the time of the call. When emergency personnel arrived, Kathleen Peterson had died. She was found at the base of a narrow back staircase inside the home. Blood was visible on the steps and on the surrounding walls. There were no immediate signs of forced entry, no apparent weapon, and no indication of an intruder. Michael Peterson stated that earlier in the evening, he and Kathleen had been outside by the pool, talking and drinking wine. According to him, Kathleen later went inside while he remained outdoors for an extended period. He reported discovering her only after returning indoors. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline. The gap between the last confirmed moment Kathleen was alive and the moment she was found injured became a point of interest. Although stairway falls could be fatal, aspects of the scene prompted closer examination. Blood was not confined to a single area. It appeared smeared and spattered along the staircase and walls. Some investigators interpreted this as evidence that Kathleen remained alive for a period of time while bleeding. The pattern was viewed by some as inconsistent with a single accidental fall. As a result, the death was reclassified from a possible accident to a suspicious death. The staircase became the focal point of the investigation, and Michael Peterson became the primary subject of scrutiny. Kathleen Peterson was a successful business executive, and while the marriage was not without stress, there was no documented history of violence. Despite this, investigators developed a theory that an argument had occurred and that Kathleen had been assaulted near the staircase. According to this theory, the blood patterns indicated repeated impacts rather than a fall. This interpretation formed the foundation of the prosecution's case, even before the autopsy findings were fully reconciled with the scene. The medical examiner determined that Kathleen Peterson died from blood loss associated with multiple lacerations to the scalp. A significant detail, however, stood out. There were no fractures to the skull. In cases involving repeated blunt force trauma, fractures are commonly present. Severe falls can also result in fractures. Their absence introduced uncertainty. The placement and nature of the lacerations further complicated conclusions. Some injuries appeared in locations not typically associated with stairway falls, while others did not clearly indicate a specific cause. While these findings did not rule out homicide, they did not conclusively support it either. Rather than prompting a reassessment, the inconsistencies were addressed through speculative explanations. Prosecutors argued that the volume of blood alone made an accidental fall implausible and suggested Kathleen had been struck with an object capable of causing lacerations without fracturing the skull. No such object was ever identified. At trial, emphasis remained on the crime scene. Jurors were shown graphic photographs and heard testimony interpreting bloodstains as evidence of an assault. The ambiguities within the autopsy report received comparatively little attention. Defense experts countered that scalp lacerations can bleed profusely without fractures and that the narrow staircase, with hard surfaces, could account for multiple impacts during a fall. These arguments struggled to outweigh the visual power of the scene itself. Years later, concerns emerged regarding the reliability of the forensic testimony used at trial. The medical examiner involved had provided questionable testimony in other cases, some of which were later overturned. Independent reviews emphasized that the injuries could be consistent with a fall, and that blood volume alone was not determinative. In 2011, Michael Peterson was granted a new trial. In 2017, he entered an Alford plea, maintaining his innocence while acknowledging the prosecution's position. The case concluded legally, but critical questions remain unresolved. Kathleen Peterson's death is still classified as a homicide, yet debate continues. The case remains a cautionary example of how early assumptions can shape an investigation and how unresolved forensic contradictions can endure when one narrative is favored over another. When physical evidence conflicts with medical findings, the pursuit of truth depends on which is allowed to guide the investigation. In this case, that question still lingers.